that all directors are here and accounted for. All right, truth and taxation public hearing.
Come on in, it's okay. You won't eat.
All right, well, thank you for having me. My name is Aaron Bushberger. I'm from Ellers, who are your financial advisors. I'm a senior financial specialist there. Prior to my time at Ellers, I spent 16 years as a business manager for a couple of different school districts. So I am familiar with truth and taxation and the public hearing and things like that. So more than happy to go through this with you here tonight. So we've got a pretty robust and thorough presentation here. I believe you just went through your audit, I believe maybe like a month ago. So I won't spend a whole lot of time on the budget pieces and really kind of dig into the levy a little bit more detail. So, Minnesota law requires the public meeting that we're having tonight. On the next slide here, I don't know, you're the scroller?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So we have a public meeting that has to be at 6 o'clock or later, right? We must allow for public comments, which we will allow for at the end of the presentation. And then you can adopt the levy here tonight as well. And then it also requires a presentation of the district's current year budget, as well as the proposed property tax levy, which we'll get to in more detail here. So for the agenda, we like to provide some background information just on school funding in general. We think it's helpful in the context of the proposed property tax levy. Again, the district's budget, the proposed levy, and then we'll allow for public comment, as I mentioned. Yep, and then we're the next one. The next one more slide. So the Minnesota legislature, right, must have funding for Minnesota public school districts. That's part of the Constitution. We won't get into a whole lot of detail here, but that's kind of the high level requirement from the state of Minnesota. And they do, as we'll see, provide the majority of your funding for Minnesota school districts. So as a result of that constitutional mandate, on the next slide there, funding is highly regulated, right? The state, as you're aware, sets the funding formulas for state sources. They also have a statute tax policy for school districts. And then they really state the maximum levy that districts are allowed to approve. And so again, there's two components, which you'll see. The first is voter approved levy categories, and the other components are really allowed by state statute. Next slide. So just kind of, again, a high level overview, but we know that there are funding challenges when it comes to the state of Minnesota. The state sets a basic general education formula. Again, this is our primary source of funding. We like to look back about 20 years over that time and compare it to inflation. And so we know over the course of that time, our general education funding has not kept pace with inflation. We do know for the upcoming 2 school years, the legislature did approve a 2.45% increase in funding this year, which I'm sure you're aware of, and then a 2% increase in the next year. So the next slide is just a graphical representation of that. You can see the blue line is what the funding would have been if it would have followed inflation. And then the dotted orange line towards the bottom is our actual funding. And so that gap there is about $600 per student. And so when you multiply that times the amount of students that you serve, that obviously adds up in our country. So that's the general education piece. Another funding challenge that we're currently facing is the underfunding of special education. So the federal government way back when committed to funding special education at approximately 40%. Currently, that's more like 10%. The state of Minnesota does also provide funding as well, but you may be experiencing that's not enough to keep up with the growing costs in special education. And so we just have a couple bullet points here that if you look statewide, special education is currently underfunded by about $670 million across the state. So it is a big deal. It impacts all districts across the state of Minnesota. And again, a result of this underfunding is what's known as the cross subsidy, meaning you're taking your general fund dollars and allocating that towards your special education programming costs. And so that's potentially taking away from other programming that the district provides. And then on the next slide, digging into the levy a little bit more. We'll get to a slide here in a couple minutes, but just because the levy changes doesn't necessarily mean that the budget changes, right? The levy is a component of the district's revenue, but it's not the only component. And so, as I mentioned, the levy is based on many state determined formulas, plus anything that is voter approved, which is in your case, the voter approved bonds that were approved, I believe 6 or 7 years ago. We'll point out in one of the details in one of the levy categories, some of the increases in the levies are neutral to the district, meaning just because your levy goes up doesn't necessarily mean the district gets more money. There are certain formulas in state law where if your levy goes up, sometimes the state funding goes down. And we'll point that out in a couple minutes here. The expenditure budget really is limited by, right, how much revenue you have, any fund balance you have, whatever kind of fund balance policy you might have in place. And an increase in school taxes does not always result in an increase to how much you can spend every year. I think it's important to note that the school district levy cycle differs from our city and county friends. So the cities and counties run on a calendar year, and so does our property tax levy cycle. So it's really easy for cities and counties. I shouldn't say it's really easy, but it's easier, right? Where they approve their levy for the upcoming fiscal year for them, and away they go. For school districts, it's a little bit different, right? Because our fiscal year is July 1 through June 30th. And so the property taxes that your district residents are going to pay next year for 2022 is revenue for the 2022-23 school year, right? So we're always kind of in that odd cycle there. And then, so obviously your next year's budget will then be approved in next June as well. So getting into the budget information a little bit more, and I know, as I mentioned, I think you just recently approved your audit, so I'm sure you've seen some of these details. But right, we're required by law to keep our funds in different funds. And so we've got the general fund, which is our primary fund, right? Teacher salaries, custodial salaries, utilities, things like that are all in the general fund. Then you have food service fund and community service fund, which is pretty straightforward. Your debt service fund, again, this is where we levy and then make principal and interest payments on your outstanding debt. And then you also have a trust fund, which is made up of scholarships and student activities. So those are really the 5 funds. And so the next slide shows, so I know this is a little hard to see on the screen, but really the first 4 columns are your 2020-21 fiscal year results. So it's your beginning fund balance, your revenues, expenditures, and then your ending fund balances. And so again, that you saw all of that when you reviewed the audit about a month ago. Then in the next 2 columns are the 2021-22 budget. So the first is the revenues, expenditures, and then your projected ending fund balance at the end of June 30th, 2022. All right, so on the next slide is just more of a visual representation of that. So this is the revenue for all of your funds. And as you can see, as we mentioned, the general fund is by far your largest fund. In the light blue is debt service. In the green is community ed, and then in the orange is your food service budget. So just a breakdown of kind of all of your funds and the revenue for each of those. Then we're going to break down the general fund revenue a little bit more. And so the orange is state funding, and so that's 86% of your overall funding for the general fund does come from the state, primarily through your general education revenue program. The green is federal funding, which is 5.7%. And then local funding for the general fund is 8.4%. And in that local is a portion of your property tax levy that's allocated to the general fund. And we'll look at that in a couple of minutes here. The next slide is a look at your general fund expenditures. We look at it two different ways. The first here is by program, so where you're spending the funds. And so like any other school district, the green there is regular instruction, so that's 48.7%. The purple sliver on the left is vocational ed instruction, and then in the light blue on the left is special education instruction. And so between those three categories that are all devoted to instruction, that's about really 2/3 of your costs are going directly to instruction in the classroom. The next pie chart is the same exact general fund expenditure budget, but it's broken down by what's referred to as an object category. And so you can see on the bottom is in the blue is salaries and wages of 61%. And then on the left in the orange is employee benefits at 17%. So that's about 78% of your budget, like any other Minnesota school district, is going towards salary and benefits for your district. Does anyone have any questions? I'll maybe stop there. Any questions on the budget at all before I dig into the levy?
Is there any hope of increasing educational funding this year at all?
That's a great question. I wish I had.
Thank you.
I wish I had a crystal ball, right? We do know that there's a surplus at the state. That's all I know.
But see,
So,
out-of-state people don't generally share in that piece of that pie.
Sure.
It goes to the metro, and there's some filters out here. Just
Sure.
wondering.
Yeah.
I know you don't have the answers.
Yeah.
but just
Yeah.
wondering.
I'm anxious to see.
I am
sure.
too.
Yeah.
I am too.
Okay, we'll dig into the property tax levy. So first, we'll talk a little bit about how the levy is determined. We'll compare last year's levy to this year's proposed levy, give you some reasons for why that's changing, and then we'll also show you an impact on different taxpayers that are located in Warrenton. So a little bit about the property tax background. Every owner of taxable property pays property taxes to various taxing jurisdictions, right? The school district, the city, the county, right? We're really focused tonight on just the school district portion. Each jurisdiction gets to set its own levy based on law that I previously mentioned. And then really the county manages that entire levy process. They send out bills, they collect the taxes, and then they distribute the funds to the different jurisdictions. So this next slide shows just a sample of the proposed property tax statement that gets mailed out to your residents. And so this is required in law to be mailed out between November 11th and November 24th. Again, it contains information on comparing the property taxes to last year and what the proposed property taxes are for this coming year. And then it also contains the time and the place of the public meeting that we're having tonight. And then for the school district portion in particular, it breaks the levy categories down by voter approved and then other category, which in essence is anything that's not voter approved that is allowed to be levied by state law. So for the school district property taxes, so each school district is allowed by law to levy in over 40 different categories. It's a common phrase that Minnesota school district finance is complicated, and it really is. There's 40 pages to the levy report. Other neighboring states have like 3-page levy reports, right? So this is complicated. As I mentioned, the maximum levies are for each category are set by either state law or by voter approval. And then the Department of Education really manages the school district levy process. And so district staff work closely with the Department of Education on ensuring the levy is correct and the proposed levy is accurate. So there are 7 steps that we really do as part of this property tax process. The school district really plays a role in one of those steps. So if you could go to the next slide here, I'll just kind of run through that. Again, this is kind of small and a little hard to read. Hopefully you can see it a little better on your devices, but that really starts with the county assessor, right? They assess your property values. Then based on what the legislature defines for their formulas for how different properties are taxed, those two pieces go together and then move on to the county auditor where they calculate how much is taxed. And then step 4, again, using the legislature. Again, they define what we can and can't levy from a school district perspective. So really all of that goes to the Department of Ed, who then works with us. You can see in step 6 there is the school board. So this is where you come in after all of those things have been defined to approve the proposed property tax levy, which you did back in September. And then you're here to approve the final levy tonight. And then finally on step 7 there, as I just mentioned, the county auditor then handles all of that process for collecting taxes and distributing those funds. So on the next slide is a schedule. So that first bullet there is September 8th. So that's when the Department of Education comes out with their first levy reports for school districts to look at and verify the information is correct. Then September 27th, you all approve the proposed levy. And then that information goes to the county and then they develop those proposed property tax statements, which we just saw an example of. And that gets mailed out to homeowners so they can see that, understand that, and allows them to understand what their proposed property taxes are, and then attend the public hearing tonight if they would like to provide some public input. And then following that, the board then approves that levy, and that information gets sent to the county for them to manage the next year's levy process. So now specific to Royalton, overview of the levy payable in 2022. So if you're comparing this proposed levy to last year's, the levy is scheduled to increase by about $119,000 or 5.5%. And so we'll get into a couple of those details here in the next few slides. So this next slide breaks down the proposed property tax levy and comparing it to last year. So it's broken out by 3 pieces. You can see the general fund on the top. The community service fund is in the middle, which school districts are allowed to levy for. And then the debt service fund is at the bottom. And again, as I mentioned, that debt service fund, right? Levy comes into that fund and then it is used to pay off your principal and interest on your debt service. And then on the bottom there, we have a subtotal by the category. So you can see the voter approved is going up by about $83,000. And then the other category is going up by about $35,000. So between those two, that's about $119,000 increase. So we have 2 slides here that really explain the levy changes from last year to this year. So this first one is prior year adjustments. And I know that's kind of a generic category, but when we do the levy every year, it's really based on estimates, right? So this levy is for your 22-23 fiscal year. So we're estimating how many students you're going to have. There's estimates based on how much you're going to spend. And so that levy is all based on the estimates. And so in subsequent year levies, once those actual amounts are known, then adjustments come through the levy cycle. And so this, for example, we have 16 different levy adjustments that are coming through just on this one levy cycle. So overall, the net change is about $17,000. So it's not, I wouldn't call it necessarily significant because there can be big swings in those adjustment amounts. But it is an amount that changed compared to last year. So that's really the first explanation of the levy change. The second one is related to voter approved debt and the debt service fund. So you can see that's increasing by about $78,000. And so these funds, again, are used to pay off your principal and interest on your outstanding debt. Just a little explanation for this levy change. So the amount of your principal and interest payments aren't going up. They're staying the same from your last levy cycle. So we're in a fortunate situation where the state does help pay for some of those principal and interest payments for your debt. So just generally speaking, when your property values go up, the state pays less and the district on the property tax rolls has to pay a little bit more. That works vice versa. If your property values go down, the state will pay more and your property taxpayers will pay less. And so overall, for this next levy cycle, Royalton's seen about a 7% increase in your overall property values. And so that increase is allowing the property taxpayers to pick up a little bit more related to the debt service payments. If you recall, I previously mentioned that this is a prime example of, even though your levy is going up, it doesn't mean that the district is getting more money, right? Because the state amount is going down in corresponding fashion. And so the amount that the district is receiving is really staying flat over the course of last year compared to this year. So the next slide is, we're going to get into just some examples now of individual properties. And so before we do that, just know that there's different factors that could impact an individual's home or a property. The change in the value of their individual property. If their value goes up by 10% or 15% and everyone else's goes up by 2%, that individual property owner is going to end up paying more. Their increase is going to be more than maybe their neighbor. Changes in total value of all property in the district. So as I mentioned, your total value is going up by 7%. And so that can have an impact as well. And then any increases or decreases in the levy amounts, and we just touched on a couple of those, which will impact your overall levy. The next slide, so we like to do a 4-year levy comparison. So we're going to show you in a couple slides here an example of different homeowners and what they might pay over the course of the past 4 years. And so as a reminder, this is for school district taxes only. And so we're trying to get as accurate example as we can for Royalton. And so we're assuming that the value of this property, of our example property, is going up by 13.6% over the course of these 4 years. And so, right, we're looking at your property data and we're saying on average, it's a 5% increase, a 4% increase, and a 4% increase. So we're trying to give you the best example that we can. So the next slide, this is just a note that these amounts for 2022 are preliminary at this point. We got the information from the county, but that still needs to be finalized, and we're the ones that are putting together this information for you. The next slide is very hard to read, but hopefully, it can be out on, I think it's out on the board packet. So if folks are interested, they can take a look at this information. But we're showing the different types of property. So the top part is residential, commercial, and then ag property. And we're showing the 4-year comparisons here. And on the next slide is a better visual representation of this. And so on the left-hand side is residential homestead property that's currently valued at $100,000. And so again, we're assuming this property increased in value by 13% over the course of the past 4 years. So in 2022, the far right-hand column there, it's estimated that that property owner will pay $409 in school district portion of their property taxes. If you back up one left, in 2021, that amount was $404. So that $100,000 homeowner, again, this is an example, this is on average, is going to see a $5 increase over their taxes from last year. So even though your overall levy is going up by 5%, the fact that your property values went up so much are helping to lessen the impact on your homeowners. So that's a $100,000 example. On the right-hand column is a $200,000 homeowner. So that is projected to be $957 this year. It was $945 last year. So it's a $12 increase for that homeowner. On the next slide are 2 more residential examples. So it's a $250,000 homeowner is projected to see a $16 increase. And then on the right, a $300,000 homeowner is expected to see a $20 increase. So those are all residential examples. I will mention for ag land owners, they're actually going to see less of an increase. And part of that reason is if you're familiar with the school building ag credit that the state provides, that ag credit amount is actually increasing in the next year. And so based on just the average example, again, this isn't going to be exact for everyone. They're going to be seeing less than a 1% change in their overall property tax. So I think that is a positive as well. A couple of pieces that we also like to share. There's two property tax credit programs within the state of Minnesota, and there's one deferral program. So the first is known as a circuit breaker credit. It's available each year to owners of any homestead property. There's income limitations, and then there's also a sliding scale, but we always encourage folks to either go out on the website or contact the Department of Revenue to get more information about how and if they might qualify for that property tax credit. The next slide shows an additional credit. This really pertains to homeowners or homestead properties that see an increase of at least 12% and $100 in their property taxes over the previous year. And so that's another property tax refund that's available, although it's not as popular and widespread as the circuit breaker credit that I just mentioned. And then finally is a deferral program for senior citizens. There's an age requirement and an income requirement there. You can see, I will mention, it's not a credit, it's simply a deferral. And so I think that's important to highlight that. It doesn't necessarily mean your property taxes are reduced. Sometimes they're just deferred in the future years. And then the next slide is just really next steps. So as I mentioned, right, we'll allow for public comment and then ask the board to certify the final property tax levy. And again, this levy information is due by the end of December to the Department of Ed and to the county, so then they can process the taxes for next year. So I can always answer any questions you have for the public comment if you'd like.
Aaron, that we have a lot of senior citizens in my area.
Sure.
That in their homes for a long time. They certainly don't have over $60,000 income.
Sure.
Now, the deferral, what does that mean? Does it mean that it will just decrease that part and that's forgiven? Or is it deferred to another year? Because that gets you a little,
Yeah.
It's deferred upon death plus interest.
pardon me?
It's deferred upon death until death and then plus the interest. I'm
So,
correct on that.
I
ain't I?
believe so, yes.
so then it's actually never forgiven. And
No,
those
Right,
babies-
it's not a
forgiveness.
It's not.
It's not a-
It sounds nice, but it's not doing anything, is what you're saying. Thank you.
It's,
That's what I mean. It's okay, you be honest. It's all
Yeah.
right. Don't worry. You know. I also know that the formulary for most of that is insane. So, you know. I'm smarter than I was. But yes, thank you, Aaron. Thank you.
are there any questions at all before the public comment piece? No, there was a lot there.
No, actually, it helps to have had the audit not real long, you know,
Oh, yeah.
because otherwise, I know a couple of years ago, we had the audit like in September or maybe even earlier. And then kind of, not that you forget, but then you have to go and relearn all those numbers again, right when you're going through this. So yeah, it's okay.
Also a question.
Yep.
So I think you said it's going up 119,000, right? Give or take. So then some of it is going up because of those 16 offsets, right? It was going up 17,000.
Mhm.
And then there's another 78,000 that was going up because of reduced, leveling out because of property tax.
Yep.
So really, what the school board it really is, and it's gonna do that regardless.
Mhm. That's
So really what we're in control of is like $24,000 of income is what we're talking about.
I would say if that,
Okay.
I think a lot of those other, and honestly, a lot of those other smaller changes are all in state law calculations
Right.
as well, right? So, yeah, so it's
Okay.
limited.
I didn't
Mhm.
Just
wanted to
checking
be
to make sure.
clear that it really, I liked your slide where you showed the boxes and the 7 steps. That was awesome. But it just shows in this whole process. We like to think we have this control.
We don't, we never did.
We have some, right, but
Not
not
much.
as much as you would like to think, so, yeah.
Well, our control on the board for taxes really resides in them 2 locally school board approved levies.
Yep.
But there's so much equalization dollars in it that it's tough to turn them down. So I mean, and that's designed because of that,
That's
Yeah.
right.
you know, that's the way it's designed, so.
Thank you, Aaron. That was
Yep.
an
Yep.
excellent
Yep. Thank you.
presentation.
Yeah, that's
Yep.
I
very
learned
good,
a
thank
lot.
you.
Thank you. And it was fun putting you in the hot seat.
Okay. So now we have public comment. Does anybody want to say anything? A lot of public here.
Am I the only public?
No pressure, but-
I was here because we are new to Royalton and I was like sick to see that I'm gonna be paying almost $200 a month just in levies. That made me really ill. But I can see where your guys' hands are tied. That's kind of like you said, you're really only increasing it by 17. I have to admit, I'm sorry, I think the state's wrong. Well,
Oh, no.
just because my homeowner value went up doesn't mean my income went up, so why, how does my homeowner value increasing affect my income? Unless I sell, it doesn't. So.
That's right. And that's what happens with elderly people too.
Right.
Like, you know, our income doesn't increase, but our taxes and levies sure as heck do.
Well, they seem to work it out that the way this whole system works with this property taxes is it gets to be too much, the state comes in and offers some relief, and then the values tend to go up
So it doesn't
to get the
matter.
dollars
Yeah.
back, you know, so it's always just
It's always in flux.
Do you have any other questions or not?
No, that was just it. I was
Okay.
just like, what is going on? Why am I paying so much?
And where am I gonna get a second job, right?
Yeah, pretty much like, oh my gosh, maybe we need to.
We're hired.
consider going to Royalton. I don't know if I can afford
You
that.
can't drive a bus, can you?
Yeah.
I just thought I'd throw it out there.
We can use bus drivers, food
Yeah.
service. I've got lots of employment.
It's just wide open, yeah. I'm sorry, because that's hard. It is, it puts a young family in a dilemma. And, you know, I have often said we gotta beat them up in the legislative branch. And that's where you have to start sending those letters and comments and bust them in the chops if you have to, and say, listen, this is ridiculous. You couldn't afford it if you were living on X amount of dollars either, you know? But really, think of old people too, because they really, yeah, that's why I'm here.
Kind of off of your point, do we know, I mean, I know we don't have any big like levies going.
Other than
Spacing
building.
on what the term is.
Yes, we don't have an operating.
Operating, there you go.
Yeah, so there's only about 30% of the districts in the state that don't have an operating levy. We're one of them. As is many of the neighbors out here districts. But yeah, so that also is a relief to the taxpayer because they're not paying in that. However, it is reduced dollars for us.
Right,
all the time,
right.
as compared to those around us that may have one, so.
Yeah,
Like
do
why
they
they
ever
don't
look
have
at income levels
technology,
here in the area?
Levy.
When they're
Levy.
making out this formulary, do they ever look at the income levels of the area? Because a lot of these old people don't make much money and a lot of the young
Yeah.
people don't either. They're just starting out. They've got babies, they've got things going on. You probably do too. I mean, do they look at that when they're creating this, or do they just say, well, it's just a little town and that's how it goes and too bad? No industry got bars, you know, got churches, but not a lot of industry, not a lot of internet. So if you're going for a job, you gotta go out. I don't know. I just think the way they do it is not very nice.
Monday the
Do we know how we compare to other districts in our area?
As far as what piece of information,
The taxes, like what,
how much you paid total.
yeah,
Um,
just out of
we
curiosity.
can get that for you.
I was just
Yeah, I
curious if
mean,
you kind of knew if you were kind of the same, lower, higher,
Yeah, yeah,
I don't know.
it's
I
a,
think a lot of it deals with operating levy
Right.
and the voter approved, right? That's where,
Yeah, and you're gonna see the differences. I'm just curious.
So do larger towns, like Sartell, St. Cloud, do their property, do those people pay less? Homeowners, because it's more to disperse, more properties to disperse costs to.
not necessarily, it kind of depends on
Well,
their property tax base, right? How much commercial investment
Rail-
they have.
they
but-
might.
Railton's problem is that our big business is the school. We don't have any industry. It would be nice if we would get some industry, because like Sartell built the school from the paper mill.
Mhm.
You know, they can tax those commercial businesses a lot harder than they tax
Homeowners. yeah.
homeowners.
Yeah.
So, you know, it is what it is. It's, you know, maybe 10 years from now it'll change. We don't know. You know, it's-
Just depends on how your growth is.
Yeah,
If
you
Royalton
know.
were to somehow expand commercially.
Yeah.
Then
It
it
would
would
help.
change.
There
your
would be
tax
some relief
rates.
that way.
We would take
If
it
you
off
just
the
keep building homes and keep
But
it
if it
residential.
smelled like Sartell, I don't know how many people want to live here, so. So, you know,
Well, I think that's where I was shocked too, because we came from St. Stephen, which is Sartell School District,
okay.
which
Mhm.
I'm sure it was spread out. You didn't see levies like that.
So. All right,
That makes sense.
are there any other questions from the public? If not, I'm gonna look for a adjournment, but we will certify this next week on the 20th at a regular board meeting that was rescheduled because of a choir concert. So hearing no other comments, somebody got a motion to adjourn? Second? Sure. Moved by Director Lang and seconded by Director Hofstad. To adjourn the meeting at 6:37. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, all oppose. All abstain. Meeting adjourned. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.